What is the difference between Chassidus in Russia or Europe and America? Oh, that's a loaded question. Oh, that's a loaded question. My answer to that question is there's no difference in the Chassidus. There's an enormous difference in the Chassidim. And there's an enormous difference in their environment. I'm going to tell you something that I heard secondhand. There was a Yid in Crown Heights who I knew, who had a connection to a Kloisenberger Chassid, who told him that he had a Yechidus with the Rebbe many years ago. I don't know when, but many years ago. And in the Yechidus, the discussion turned to the question of different kinds of Chassidus, Chabad versus Poilin, in the classical quote. And that, I don't know if he was asking or the Rebbe was offering the question of why Chabad is so important. What's wrong with something other than Chabad? And the Rebbe told him a fascinating thing. He said, the reason there were different types of Chassidus is because Chassidus was revealed or developed in different communities that had different darkei halimud. There were different approaches to learning. In Hungary, in Poland, in Russia. And because there were different darkei halimud, there were different darkei Chassidus. And then the Rebbe told him, today, it's been universally accepted that derech halimud is Litvische, the Litvische derech halimud. And therefore, the Chassidus that has to be universally studied is Chabad, which is a Litvische Chassidus. It's a fantastic interpretation, because that means that if there are 20 different drachim to Chassidus, I don't know if there are 20, but there's certainly more than 2, it's because there were different communities who learned Torah differently, and the Rebbe argued that today that it's universally accepted that the best derech halimud, the derech of Litvish and Lenin, of the Liban and Litte, so the Chassidus should be in the derech of Chassidim Lit, of Toiras Litte, which is Chassidus Chabad. That's what the Rebbe told. You see, Chassidus is for living people, communicated by living tzaddikim, living rebbes, who are the Moshe Rabbeinu of their times, which means just like Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah once upon a time, and even though there's no new Torah, chas v'sholom, but there is a renewed Torah. The way the Torah is brought to people of a different time and in a different place. So when you ask me what's the difference in Chassidus in Russia and Chassidus in America, you have to understand the difference between the Chassidim in Russia and the Chassidim in America. And there are so many differences. Before you even go to the fact that their worlds were cloistered and safer and purer and holier, and ours much more pluralistic, much more open, with much more challenge and so on. Before you even get to that, think about the culture of a Russian Jew, a Russian human being, and an American. We're culturally different. I would argue that the culture, the psychology of a Russian person is a Gevura personality. It's quite pessimistic. It has a very dark sense of the world. They have dark humor, they have dark music, they have dark art, and they have dark philosophy. Their tendency to be very critical. They're also very intelligent. But there's a gvura, there's a darkness about the culture. And I think the Chassidus, believe it or not, reflected that. In other words, it didn't only reflect the Torah of Russenland, it reflected the people of Russenland, because they're all connected. You live in a certain place, you're affected by your environment. Americans are very open, they're very honest, they're positive, maybe even to the point of naivete, a little bit too positive. And they just need a different pill. In other words, before you get to all of the differences in terms of our religiosity, just looking from a cultural perspective, American people are very different than Russians. And you cannot give an American a Russian version of Chassidus. It just doesn't work. The melancholy negunim and the melancholy fabrengen and the whole melancholy disposition towards life, which includes a very severe measure of acceptable criticism. You criticize yourself, you criticize others, you judge, you analyze, you study people and actions. It doesn't work in America. Americans are not mediums for that kind of life. They're just not those kind of people. Now, people came to America and said, Americans will not make good Hasidim. Why? Because they don't have Russian blood. They don't have that melancholy. They don't have that intensity. They don't have that critical thinking and judgmentalism, often directed towards self. They're freer, they're opener, they're more happy, they like themselves more. The Frierdiker Rebbe came here, and he said that he knows that the presumption is that American Jews are not the right schede for Yiddishkeit and for Chassidus. And the Rebbe said, I disagree. The Rebbe said, I see American youth as a very fertile surface to plant the seeds of Chassidus. I heard from Yankel Hecht, J.J. Hecht, who was certainly an American Chassid, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said that Amerikaner Jugend sind a gute Teig. The American youth are very good dough, aber darf sie kneten. They have to be thoroughly kneaded, that things should mix and stick. Because Americans may not be intense and melancholy, which seems to support the intensity of the Derech of Chabad, but they're very sincere. Americans are the most honest, sincere people in the world, and I believe also kind. I think it's the culture in America. Those character traits are very good for Chassidus, but it has to be different. It can't be good. It can't be negative. It can't be sad and heavy. It has to be joyous and alive and positive. And if you really get down to it, right, the changes that the Rebbe made in Chassidus, without a doubt, have a lot to do with the fact that, we're living in a world where most Jews are not frum, where even frum Jews are very open to the secular world, to the greater world, and you have to deal with those tests. That in the shtetl in Russia before World War I, you didn't have to face those tests. But before you get to any of that, just the personality of a Russian Jew, a Russian person, and an American person is so different. You have to adapt to Chassidus. Chassidus in America cannot be negative, and Chassidus in Russia had to be negative. It's culturally expected. And the Rebbe made changes because he understood the American psyche so well. And like the Frierdiker Rebbe, a Rebbe and a Rebbe is really one neshama. He understood Americans are incredibly good mediums for emes, for mesiras nefesh, for sacrifice, for truth, for principle, for idealism. But it has to be packaged. Positive, kind, happy. And I guess one of the things which maybe some of us would see as a negative Americans needed to look pretty. Americans are very much about a pretty face. And the Chassidus has to have that appeal also, that in Russia wasn't such a big priority. Now, you asked a question, and I answered it, but I don't think I answered the question the way you would have wanted me to answer it. Because I didn't address the Yiddishkeit, I simply addressed the societies. So I'm going to give myself another opportunity to answer this question a second time, where I'm going to talk about the difference in the world of Yiddishkeit in Russia and in America. And this is going to be, of course, more specific to not the difference between the Chassidus, but between how the Rebbeim treated, how the Rebbeim acted.